Okay. Hello, everybody. As you start connecting, turning on your cameras, connecting to audio, you are all, as usual, very welcome to Behavioural Science Club on a Saturday. And as everything starts to open up, I'm sort of getting a feel that this has sort of changed a little bit because people are starting to meet up, and I'm thinking, getting kind of cheesed off with signing into things on webinars. But that is absolutely what we are. We are a Behavioural Science Club, and we are a club of people who meet on a Saturday, and many of you are very much friends. And every week we manage to entice people to come and join us. Very interesting people, very talented people, authors, speakers, specialists in their area. And this week we are very honoured to be joined by Jessica Tollette. And Jessica is going to update us on her status, because I put in the spec that Jessica was Academic Director of the Bachelor's Programme, Behaviour and Social Sciences at IE, University Madrid. So before I even start to ask questions properly, I'm going to ask Jessica to join us and give her own little update about where she's at the moment. So you're welcome to join us, Jessica.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can, Jessica.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I'm actually joining today from Washington, D.C. I have taken on a new role, which is really exciting because I get to combine all the things that I learned in my role as the academic director at IE. But I'll be joining a research and policy nonprofit here in DC called Innovations for Poverty Action. And so there's a lot of behavioral economists that work for them. They actually run experiments and interventions worldwide, mostly in developing countries, to help think about alleviating poverty. And so my role for them will be leading their diversity and inclusion strategy. I start on Monday, so I haven't quite joined the ranks. I got here last Monday, so I'm in between like jet lag, excitement, exhaustion, and pure fear, but it's going to be great. And I'm really excited. I'm excited to be here with you guys this morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are, and talk to you a little bit more about my journey to behavioral science, which I think is a bit unconventional. So, I guess we'll dive into that later.
Fantastic, Jessica. Well, first of all, congratulations from all of us on your new position. And I mean, many of the questions that I was going to open with are still just as relevant. So I think I'll still stick with my first question, which is, in your role in IE Uni in Madrid, you were the academic director. Now, what does that exactly mean, Jessica, in terms of managing a program with as wide a spec as behaviour and social sciences? So what exactly was your remit when you were there?
Yeah, so I guess the job description is to kind of lead everything that has to do with the day-to-day of the bachelor degree program. So that's everything from finding faculty to creating the study program, which is all of the courses, the syllabi, what the course content is, and kind of create an overarching vision and flow to the program. I think you mentioned when you introduced me, and obviously those of you who have connected with me on LinkedIn, thank you for that. I'm a sociologist. So I came to Madrid originally in 2014 to look at immigrant integration in Spain. And I fell in love with Spain, and my role in IE was kind of the first time I started to identify as a behavioral scientist. And I do that warily because I'm not an applied behavioral scientist as of yet, but I think academically, in terms of the content of the program, I was hired to create and design the program. So I have been involved in every single thing that has touched that bachelor degree: recruiting the students, finding faculty, creating collaborations and partnerships. So we had a huge conference this year, and I think some of you guys attended that conference. That was a student-led initiative that had behavioral scientists from all over the world thinking about design thinking, about motivation, about weird behavioral science. Prakash was there. So in the past 4 years since we started the program, it's really grown, and people are starting to recognize it beyond just kind of this little tiny degree at a university that some people may or may not know of. So that's also very exciting that I'm leaving it in good hands. It's growing. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if I answered your question, but basically everything that has to do with the program was something that I touched, including, what does behavioral science mean at IE? So you mentioned that it's behavior and social sciences. Of course, I brought my sociology lens, but we're thinking about behavioral science as the study of human behavior using the social sciences. So students study political science, they study sociology, anthropology, obviously they study psychology, and it's kind of like this mix of the social sciences with a focus on human behavior using different methodologies and perspectives to help them be able to create a positive impact.
It sounds absolutely amazing. And what do you think? So you were saying you were there from 2014 up to today. I'm myself completely new to behavioral science. So in a way, I have a very narrow, limited vision because I'm absolutely up to date with everything that's new, but not familiar with how things were. So in those 6 years, Jessica, what do you think stood out as having changed most in that period of time?
I mean, if I think about it from the program perspective, I have changed the most. So I kind of came to this program really strongly identifying as a sociologist, but I think part of my own growth is looking at how the field of behavioral science has kind of exploded in the past couple of years. So when we launched the program had its first intake in 2018, but I was hired in 2017 to kind of design and create the study plan, which is what all the courses would entail and all of that stuff. But in the 4 years that I've been working with the degree, I have connected with behavioral scientists all over the world, people who are studying at the master's level, people who are interested in studying at the bachelor degree, people who are doing career change to become behavioral science consultants or opening their own businesses. We didn't have that when I first started the degree. So obviously there have been small pockets, and it's not to say that behavioral science was born yesterday, but I think certainly in the time that I've been working with the degree, I have seen it kind of explode. And now there's global organizations around behavioral science. We have the Behavioral Science Club, so I think it's definitely become more mainstream. And I think people are starting to know what it is and seeing it popping up in pop psychology literature, Atomic Habits, like Nudge. There's different books and ways that people kind of are like, that's interesting. But now they're taking it more seriously and looking at it as maybe an academic pathway or a professional pathway that I didn't see so much when we started this.
That's fascinating, Jessica. And it's just making me think, actually, I did A-levels in sociology. And when I did my history degree, it was very much sociology directed. I was always fascinated with things like looking to see how many people were living in the buildings, in these Victorian buildings in Dublin, and coming to it with your sociological perspective. And you said you recognize that you've changed, but where do you think were the areas that most opened your eyes to new things that you maybe hadn't appreciated before?
Yeah, I think there's some of us who are joining today that might have a PhD background or some sort of master's or expertise, where I think when we look at those fields, being a sociologist, I was very much indoctrinated into sociological theories. There's a particular way that we approach questions or questions that we ask. And I feel like for me, behavioral science has kind of opened up this world of thinking about human behavior as not necessarily so field specific, and really owning and embracing multidisciplinary ideas and multidisciplinary approaches and theories to answer the questions that we think can help us make the biggest impact in human behavior or behavioral change or behavioral design.
It's great talking to you, Jessica. And as you said, you're traveling into this new role now to function very much on your specialization in diversity and inclusion. I was rather controversially had this conversation with one of our club members in the week because I put a review up of The New Age of Empire by Kehinde Andrews. And he's an extremely powerful speaker, powerful writer. But he had said about diversity inclusion. He says that rebranding a racist problem is not a step in the right direction. We entirely miss the point if we believe that racism can be overcome with token gestures, commitment to diverse hiring practices, or statements of brand solidarity. So obviously he feels extremely strongly about tokenism. Is this something that you have? I mean, other people are just like, sure, as long as we're talking about the subject, I'm happy. So, where do you think you come on that spectrum, Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that we can't get anything done if we aren't talking about it. So that's really an important first step. I don't think that talking about it is going to solve all the problems. I'm not 100% convinced that hiring a chief diversity officer can, be the solution to organizational issues, to human behavior problems that we've had for thousands of years, and conflict, and some of the things that I was studying in my dissertation about adaptation, about cultural differences. Those kinds of things exist in societies and cultures and neighborhoods, and obviously in organizations. And so I'm excited about the conversations that are being started, the initiatives, the financial investments that organizations are making into supporting, creating and promoting inclusive practices. But this is just the beginning. So, these problems have been here for a long time, and we have a long way to go to address them. And I think the excitement around it right now, the focus that has kind of been born out of 2020 about Black Lives Matter, Innovations for Poverty Action isn't the only organization that's kind of taking this seriously and trying to put people in place to make a difference. But I don't think it's going to be an overnight change. And I don't think it's radical to say that hiring someone to lead diversity is not enough. I think I tend to agree with that statement of, okay, this is just the beginning of the work. Everyone needs to kind of put their boots on and get strapped in for a journey, because it's going to be difficult. Changing the fabrics of organizational change is complicated. And so diversity and inclusion really falls within that realm.
Yeah, as you say, Jessica, it's not just a case of saying, okay, we've got to be switched on and hire a diversity officer, just like you hired a health and safety guy to come in type thing. It's a deep, radical change, isn't it, Jessica? It's a real rethink, which is going to take absolutely a very long time. And so in this new role that you're joining, which, as you said, is specializing in this particular subject, what are your hopes? What are you hoping that you can bring to the table?
Yeah, so if I go back to my original passion and my dissertation work about understanding immigrant integration or cultural adaptation from a global perspective, I'm excited that in this role, I'll be based in the United States, but I'll get to work with the global offices, thinking about how diversity and inclusion works, not just in the US, but in the offices all around the world. And for me, that gives me a lens into looking into other contexts. So I know the Spanish case and the American case very well, both at an academic level, but also in terms of lived experiences. But there's a lot of countries around the world that I have no idea, and I get to learn and kind of listen to these people as a sociologist, a qualitative sociologist. So I did my research mostly doing observations and interviews, having conversations. I'm excited to have these conversations because I think part of the work of diversity and inclusion is making people feel seen and heard. And so going in saying, I know that there's a lot of things I don't know, and importing my American framework or perspective on how race works or how gender works is not going to be a successful way of making change. So I think for me, it's a great learning opportunity to listen and to understand and learn about other cultures and countries in the same way that I've been able to do in Spain. And it's really a new chapter in my career because it's the first non-academic role that I've taken on in more than a decade. So it's a big shift, but I'm excited.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that great introduction, Jessica. So I'm going to hand over now to Prakash. Prakash, I welcome you in to have a chat with Jessica. And as all the rest of you know, within the group, if you keep popping your questions in. I'll keep a track of those and we'll be bringing them to Jessica soon. Thanks, Jessica.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much, Louise. Jessica, lovely to have you here. Congratulations on the new role, and it's nice that we are the bridge between the past role and the future. We have
but literally
question.
the bridge.
We are the bridge, lucky us. And I noticed that right now in the audience, as you pointed out some time back, there are folks who have done their PhDs, are doing their PhDs, there are people who work with the UN on women issues. I also can see some of us are young students just about getting done with their education, working on internships around behavioral science. And then I see at least 3 people who are either just about planning their startup or have already started their journey. Then I can see a couple of brand managers, marketing managers too. So it's a pretty diverse group of people. And we have someone who is from the advertising world, very, very funny, passionate about sustainability, just about joining right now. So this is the audience right now who is present. And we all have some connection or other with the world of behavioral science. And so the curiosity that we have right now is, why also teach these students political science, sociology? When you're putting up this 4-year it's a 4-year program, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, it's a 4-year program.
Why also political science? Why also sociology? And if those students are studying it as a part of their, learning behavioral science, what do we do, us in the audience, who may not have had a behavioral science degree?
Yeah, so I think behavioral science really is a loose term, so it depends on how you define it. So if I take my own definition, which is behavioral science is the study of human behavior, then looking at political systems, legal systems, criminal behavior, that's very much aligned with what behavioral science is to me. If I think behavioral science is psychology and economics, then obviously sociology and anthropology are going to fall outside of the purview of what's appropriate, right? And I think what I like about the idea of thinking about behavioral science as multidisciplinary is that you can take the tools from the different social science disciplines. So you can take experimentation and combine that with observation and combine that with interviews and focus groups and different tools that different disciplines use to answer questions about human behavior and understanding human behavior. And if that's what you think the definition is, then it fits squarely in there. And I think in the conversations that I've had with people over the past 4 years since I've been running this program and trying to figure out, what are the tools, what are the theories, what are the concepts that our students need to know in order to be able to get a job or an internship, it hasn't really ever been like, yeah, they need to know, just about psychology. I think most people that I've spoken with have agreed that behavioral science is a very multidisciplinary field. So it's an added advantage to be able to look at the questions from different disciplinary lenses and methodological approaches.
So thank you for that lovely answer. I mean, I think what we'll take away from that is, for us who do not have a formal education in the behavioral science world, maybe we also want to augment our studies, not just focus on a couple of frameworks or the usual 3 books. Maybe we pick up, a bit of Richard Nisbet, or pick up some books around sociology, books like Geography of Mind, maybe. I think that's one take you can take. You spend a lot of time in the campus last couple of years, and you've been with the young folks who are, initiated into the discipline. Is there a particular worry which you see very strongly, which you've noticed among the students? What is it that is bothering them the most? Or let me not use the word bother. What is something that is keeping them preoccupied in the world of behavioral science? It could be both directions.
Well, I think first of all is that they kind of joined a bachelor degree that they might not be certain that they have some idea of what behavioral science is. So in the first year, they said, well, I'm really excited about psychology, so I'm just glad I got to study a psychology degree. And I was like, well, this isn't exactly a psychology degree, right? So I think one of the things that worried them at first, and I figured this out after the first year of the program, so I actually created a course that's called Becoming a Behavioral Scientist, where I actually teach them what the field is, what the applications are. And that leads me to my second thing that kind of preoccupies them is like, what kind of job can I get with this, right? When you go to university and you study law, you think you want to be a lawyer. You study medicine, you think you want to be a doctor. What is behavioral science? My parents aren't sure that I should do this, but it looked really cool. I saw the brochure, I heard about the conference, whatever, right? So now they're starting to join the degree and they're like, well, what kind of job can I get, right? And so that's where it goes back to, what are the tools that we're preparing them? What are we exposing to them? What kind of applications are we exposing them to in order to see what kind of jobs they'll be able to get? So that's where, this idea of behavioral science booming and actually seeing it in the news every day is kind of helping us to get the brand out. And students are actually saying, yeah, I realized I was interested in behavioral science, and this was just one of a handful of degrees that I saw that could help me kind of achieve that objective.
One of the things that we've noticed about the journey into the world of behavioral science for us and in general is the euphoria that you have right in the beginning, because your mind is opened up to this realization that, oh, there are things behind my decisions that seem almost magical. You can hack someone's mind almost. It just seems too much like magic. You were excited the way you were when you were a child. And then as you get deeper and deeper into it, you realize there's a lot more to it. And, there is also an entire discussion right now, which is around the replication crisis. And when you point out, the first joke I used to make was around only 8 people in the world having ever read Thinking Fast and Slow. I'm going to possibly start telling people about how only barely around 50% of the book passes the replication test. And it kind of causes, some sort of a distress, because you found something fundamental, something very powerful, which explains why we do what we do. And then you realize that there could be gaps in it. Mm-hmm. How are you helping your students? How were you helping your students cope with this fact that this is a science, but this is not science in the sense of 1 + 1 = 2, mm-hmm. but more like a science, maybe, the way you look at the position of an electron in the quantum realm. Saying somewhere out there is the electron, we don't know exactly where, but somewhere out there, here is the equation for the probability. How do you help students cope with this? Is this even a question in their mind at this point of time?
Yeah, I think that's the difference between the physicists and the mathematicians and the social scientists, right? I think the sticky variable in the work that we do is that humans can be very predictable and humans can be unpredictable. And what's going on outside of your door in India can look really different of what's going on outside my door here in Washington, D.C. And that's something that we really drive home in our courses. IE is an international university. We have students from more than 100 countries around the world. And so the examples that we give in the classroom and the way that we think about context, which is a critical part of the field of behavioral science, is like, what's happening in the US. Here's one example. Here's some variables and factors that can help us explain that. And let's see if it works also in Spain. And it doesn't. And you are doing these experiments and testing things out with different groups, even on our own campus. We've had really cool activities that we were able to do in my qualitative research methods class, for example, doing observations in different neighborhoods or doing interviews with classmates about thinking about how important context is and how human behavior is not a mathematical formula, right? So I think that's indoctrinated into anyone that studies people, is that there's something, you can make a theory and theories are made to be proven, but a lot of times you test it in different contexts and it works and it replicates, and sometimes it doesn't. And that's the messiness of studying humans. But I think that's also what makes it interesting and fascinating. I don't think it's good to always get the right answer because we're evolving, context change. Imagining me in DC in a diversity and inclusion role 10 years ago at this nonprofit is unfathomable, right? But you get COVID, you get Black Lives Matter, and now there's thousands of me, right? Or people who have this role, which I should say.
I want to take that answer to the next direction, which I think is the right direction. But before that, folks who are here in the room, please feel free to have your questions ready. Put them up in the chat box. Louis is going to help moderate. Your questions are on behavioral science, academic, applied, US, Europe, whichever way. I mean, just get ready. She is an academic director. There's nothing she can handle. So she's going to teach us a lot today. Just one quick question here. We just spoke about this uncertain nature, which is very experimentative as you're trying to find the truth. That becomes the whole approach, that scientific bent of mind, saying, well, we'll find out the truth. Let's see. It worked here, it didn't work here. Let's find out what happens next. This is an approach which is the approach of a curious mind, an open mind, which can know that I may not have all the answers right in the beginning. It works really good for us in the academic world when you're a student, because you're supposed to have a curious open mind. And then if you look at it from an applied point of view, the moment you look at it as a marketeer, as a product designer, right, as a HR head, someone who has got the responsibility of eventually making money. Whatever be the task, the goal is you're going to make money at the end of it, which requires a certainty, right? So the best way to convince a marketeer to work with us and with anybody, say, you do this, you're going to have X or Y return. Let's say from advertising or a change in packaging, you change the communication, you're going to see a 5%, 10%, 20%, 30% change. And you have to give that assurance for them to kind of get to be sold on the solution. And then you have the approach of the behavioral strategy, who said, you know what, I don't know exactly why this is happening, or maybe the language is somewhere around, we'll have to find out, we'll have to explore, let's see what happens. Have you noticed something around this? Does it make the applied world comfortable, uncomfortable? And what is the best way to, it's a very open, very broad question, Jess, but I am hoping you get the gist of it. There is certain difference in both the approaches, right? So what is the best way to bridge that gap?
So I haven't worked in the applied world, so I'm just going to speak from what my gut is telling me about the similarities between studying and doing behavioral science from an academic perspective versus an applied perspective. And that is this idea of, really understanding the environment in which you're working. And so for our students, it's about teaching them theories, it's about teaching them research methods. And when you apply it, if I'm hired to help you understand your consumer market and I want to help you improve your advertising, I'm not going to just take the last project I did and say, here, do this. There takes some time. I worked in consulting for a few years, and you really spend some time kind of trying to orient yourself around the market, orient yourself around the client, and understanding and testing, right? So that's what I think behavioral science is offering, is that we test it out, we do the focus group, we do the experiment, and that will give us some results, and we see if it works, right? But there's program launches, there's new advertising that has completely flopped, there are ads that don't work, that get negative backlash. It doesn't work 100% of the time, but that goes back to your earlier question, which is like, this is not 100% science, 1 + 1 = 2, right? It depends. So I think taking the tools that we teach our students that are more academic, which is, rigor, which is think about the tool or the method that best applies to this context, right? You would take that to the applied scenario and do a survey if a survey is appropriate. You do a focus group if a focus group is appropriate. You do both if that's appropriate, but you really understand what's the question that you're trying to answer, who's the audience that you're catering to, and what are the tools and kind of steps that I need to take in order to get you the results that increase your margins by 5% or whatever the case.
One more question tied to this same zone is another observation from people who have been in the applied world. Again, I'm bringing the applied world too, because a lot of folks in the audience out here who are from the world. And one of the observations they've had is a good number of folks in the behavioral science sphere, in that world, researchers typically, they may not be as good at selling the idea as, when it comes to selling the idea. They might be very good at the research part of it, but the applied world also needs a certain sell, a certain story building, and a certain hook. You need to kind of frame, reframe. There's something, if I remember correctly, Louise, even Bree Williams had pointed out in one of the early sessions, if I remember about that. Is this something that can be handled through an academic program, or is this something like a personality thing? How does that go, Jess?
That's a hard question.
All right.
I mean, so to give you some examples, part of the study plan for our students is around building communication skills and presentation skills and being able to tell a story. Part of what I learned as a sociologist, as a qualitative sociologist, is being able to listen to a story and tell someone else's story and tell it in a compelling way, right? So, I mean, I haven't published my dissertation to become a book, but I think there are ways that people who know how to connect with people, and really, if you're studying human behavior, if you want to work with people, that kind of human connection is a really important piece of how you get the information across, of how you captivate your audience, of how you kind of get through what your point is, what your conclusion is, your selling point, right? So I think that I've lost my train of thought a little bit, but I think it all kind of comes together with some training of being like, you sell a product a lot better if you have a way of connecting with who your audience is, of understanding them, of telling the story, of relating to them in some way that's powerful, than just doing it from what you think. So I think it's a mix of training and personality. Some people are better at getting people to open up to them if they're doing an interview versus not, but there are some tricks that you can learn to kind of help you improve and get better at it. So I think it's a mix of both.
One of the good things I noticed about your students, student IE, one of my favorite places in the world, by the way, IE University, is the fact that there is a lovely behavioral economics club, and they're very active. They organize regular sessions, they reach out to folks in the industry, they organize stuff. And I think this year they also organized some sort of a competition where you had to create solutions for certain briefs around that world. So I think this kind of an approach with the students, among the student body, I think it makes at least the students that in your program much more equipped to understand that you have to sell the whole storytelling aspect of it. I hope it's really, high in your students, this aspect. I want to call in, invite in Louise here for helping moderate the Q&A session. Louise, want to hop in back?
Thank you so much, Prakash, and thank you for your super answers, Jessica. We've had loads of questions in. I've picked out some of the questions. We're going to have Arvind, Renusha, Jing, and Shrutin. So Arvind, maybe you'd like to join us first. You put a question in about the sort of terminology you're interested in, Arvind.
Yeah, I'm always especially with people jumping and working with interdisciplinary teams. And given that, she's going to be moving into a new role soon, which is going to be interdisciplinary and across countries and time zones. One of my first questions is, as an academic director, how did you deal with student terminology, which is very different from the ones that the faculty uses? And secondly, how do you how have you prepared yourself to sort of enter this new role that you're going to take on, which is going to involve people using different terms and jargons to describe the same thing? So I'm sort of curious to know as to your preparatory toolkit, so to speak, linguistically. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned before, but IE is a very international university. So the students come from different school systems. So if you want to think about the vocabulary and language and education systems and kind of what everyone's bringing to the table, that's on the students. That's one thing. Another thing is the faculty is just as international. So how you speak about things, what your cultural approach to dealing with a problem, how you confront people, how you provide a solution, these kind of things are going to be very different. So my team, we had Brazilian, Spanish, Lebanese, I'm American, you know, we were from all over the world. And so I think working in these kind of international environments prepare you to listen more than you speak at the beginning. So I'm not assuming that I have any sort of expertise or vocabulary for the language that works within the organization. But I also think, you know, in the work of inclusion, making sure that everyone has the vocabulary to be able to advocate for themselves, to be able to understand, to be able to navigate difficult situations, to kind of get through their day-to-day job. This is something that I trust my colleagues will kind of help me with in the onboarding process and as I go through my time in the organization. So I guess the trick, or, you know, my recommendation is just listen, and listen more than you speak, and ask questions. You know, everyone says when you first arrive that that's the time to ask questions. You don't want to be a year in and not know how things work. So I'm an inquisitive person by nature. So I want to know everything. I want to know how everyone else's role relates to mine, so that in case they're out sick or something happens, you know, I can step in. Like, that's just the way that my brain works. So I'm a sponge, and I'm what's the word? I'm humbled by the opportunity that I have. I don't just think, okay, so here's how we're going to do it, right? I'm arriving and I need to learn, I need to build their trust. Diversity and inclusion is about building trust and confidence that, you know, you're representing what people are telling you about their issues or the things that they need you to help address, right? So I think bringing those kind of traits that I learned as a person and developed as a sociologist and a person of color and a foreign person in my work environments, like, these are all kind of tools that I've had to say, okay, I think it works differently in different cultural contexts, different spaces. And I've kind of further honed those skills in both my academic training and my professional experience. And so I'm bringing humility and 2 ears and 1 mouth to the table. So.
Thank you. Great question, Arvind. You liked that last line. I can see from the glee on your face. Thank you, Arvind. I'd like to bring in Renusha. Renusha, I don't know if that's actually answered your question, because you were looking to talk to Jessica about the challenges of moving from academia to policy. Is there anything else you'd like to ask Renusha? No? Okay, no problem. Jing. Jing, if you'd like to join us, and welcome back, Jing. We haven't seen you for a while. You were looking to speak to Jessica about using behavioral science in world poverty. There's a big question there, Jing.
It is. Hi, Jessica. I'm just very intrigued about your new role. I hope I caught it correctly. Are you helping an organization in Washington to improve the word poverty by using behavioral science? Or that was at the beginning. Sorry, I kind of perhaps missed a little bit. But if you are, if that is in your role, I would love to hear your thoughts on the lessons that we've learned from pandemic on how to improve the word poverty. Many of us have probably read the news article about how it impacted differently in different regions, and I can assume it's more likely that impact on the poorer area more negatively than the rest of us in the Western developed countries. So it is a huge problem. So I think a lot of us are kind of sharing that passion. Just wants to hear that what are the exciting things you are planning based on what we have learned, because pandemic not only impact us negatively but also taught us a lot of lessons, and that we can use moving forward to make more positive impact.
Yes,
so what are
absolutely.
your thoughts?
Yeah, so the organization as a whole is about alleviating global poverty. So we have 22 global offices around the world, and we have projects that we run, experiments, and running interventions that are collaborating with NGOs, with universities, with ministries, and different government agencies. But my particular role is an internal role. So it's kind of like an internal consultant for diversity and inclusion. So last year they did this internal audit of saying, where do we stand with diversity and inclusion? And, what are the steps that we need to take to be a more inclusive organization? And one of the steps that they decided was to actually hire someone to come internally to help support the headquarters based in the US, and also the global offices, and thinking about building a more inclusive community inside of the organization. So my colleagues are the one that are going to be focusing a bit more on, what does this look like in X country, right? Or what are the interventions that we need to run? What are the things that we need to do? And they've actually been doing a lot of work around COVID. They have webinars, they have reports that they publish, they have a lot of online access and information that you can get to from their website. So the organization is called Innovations for Poverty Action. And if you want to learn more about some of the interventions that they've been running in COVID times, or some of the findings that they found from some experiments and research that they've done, I recommend that you go on their website, because they have a lot of publicly available information about the work that we do.
Thank you.
Okay, Jean, thank you so much, Jean, and thank you, Jessica, for sharing. That sounds extremely interesting. So next I'd like to bring in Shrutin. Shrutin, you had a question earlier on there about societal change.
Hi, Louise. Hi, Jessica. Congratulations on the new role.
Thank you.
I just wanted to know, from the time you were studying sociology, if there were any big people or societal problems that you kind of identified, and over time, as you've evolved into more behavioral kind of role, have you seen those challenges either solved or that they still exist to be solved?
Yeah. So my big two areas are racism and migration. So the short answer to your question is that they haven't been solved at all. In fact, it's gotten worse a little bit over the coming years, if that's possible. But yeah, my passions have always been about combining race and racial identity and migration. So understanding how migrants from different cultural, racial, ethnic backgrounds adapt to their new cultural contexts. And, I did my dissertation in 2014, and I collected all of these interviews. I did 100 interviews with different immigrants in Spain. And literally after I finished my data collection, was the beginning of the European migration crisis. So even between the work that I collected for my dissertation, talking about, cultural, political, societal factors that impact immigrant adaptation to a society, it has fundamentally shifted. We've seen, the rise of right-wing fascism come back in Europe, and Trumpism, and all of these kind of things in my two different contexts where, it's looking fundamentally different. As climate change continues to happen, COVID is causing a huge migration challenge globally, right? So, these are factors that are going to continue to change and evolve. And I'm not optimistic that they'll really improve in the short term. But I think that we're starting to recognize the ways in which different factors that we weren't addressing before. Climate change, refugees, crisis is going to be a huge, huge issue in the next 10 years, for example. And that's not something that I kind of did in my work. So I think your question was like, how have I seen it change? Has it improved? My answer is it's changed a lot. And I am not really optimistic that it's improving anytime soon.
Louise, in case, I can just have a follow-up question.
Of course,
thank you. Has there been any pocket where you've seen, racism or, these kind of challenges being solved or at least handled in a better way?
I think for me, my baseline of addressing racism is acknowledging that it exists. And so the changes, like even the migration challenges that Europe has faced in the past 5 years, let's say, has forced countries, prime ministers, local organizations to talk about crimes against immigrants, to talk about racism that exists in countries where they weren't talking about it before. And I'm going to contrast that with the United States, that we know is fundamentally different than Europe. They have different race issues. They have different racial categories, different ways of thinking about and conceptualizing who is an insider and who is an outsider. So, I take for granted that I understand this context, and we have been talking about race. We are racist. We admit it, not all the time. We have a lot of work to do, right? But in Europe, I think there are countries that are just now starting to say like, okay, we have enough immigrants to acknowledge that we have some problems. There's some hate crimes that we've seen. There've been Black African immigrants that were murdered in Italy that raised some protests around the time of Black Lives Matter. So there's conversations that are starting to happen. And I think these conversations are opening a window to create solutions, to help mitigate problems, to help create coexistence and a multicultural society that wasn't expected or, experienced 50 years ago, like in the UK or the US or some other multicultural countries. Like Spain is not multicultural by nature. That's new from immigration that has happened in the past 30 years. And so that process is going to look and feel different than what I've experienced in the US or what it might look like in another country that has yet to see big swaths of immigrants coming in. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And
okay.
Thank you, and wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shrutin. We're certainly tackling big issues today, Jessica, and feeling like we're putting the world to rights. We never know which direction we're going to go in when we have a guest on, and this has certainly opened up into a great big debate. So we've still got about 15 minutes left, and what I'd like to do is I'd just like to bring Prakash back in, because Prakash, you, as you said, worked with Jessica, or rather you were in a project together. Maybe you'd just like to tell us, all of us as a group, a little bit about that.
All right. Well, I think whole thing is work in progress. It's too premature at this point of time to talk about it. But if we are lucky, hopefully at the end of it, I will be able to work with Jess and create some sort of a approach. And this ties back to what the answer Jessica was giving some time back, around this fact that here are your theories, here are the experiments, and it is how they work. But you have a larger world out there. Mm-hmm. And the question is, do they replicate well? Right. So understanding and tying the role of context to behavioral science, and maybe, have an approach out there to also bring in that point of view. Mm-hmm. That was the whole discussion that we've had, but it is too preliminary right now to talk about in detail. Hopefully, as time goes by, we are able to have a lot of back and forth and then come with something concrete. But I do want to use this opportunity when you brought me back, Louise, for asking one more question to Jess. You're going back to US after a long time. I mean, you've been there, for your break in vacation, but you're going back to live and work in the States now. And last 4 or 5 years, there's been a lot of change out there. And one more change, not just in the US, a strong change across all of the world is we all can choose our own realities now. Depending on which political group you belong to, which religion you belong to, which caste, which color you belong to, which zone you are from, it has become very easy for us to believe our own chosen version of reality. And that is not new. We have always chosen our version of reality, all of us. But the majority of still, agreed on a larger definition of what was real, what are the facts, and alternative facts as a phrase would, straight up take away credibility from the person who would talk about that, right? So we understood certain rules. But over the last couple of years, those boundaries seem to have blurred a lot more. And as you go back to US to start your new career out there, what are your thoughts around this? Is there a way to bridge gaps between this diverse group who each choose to believe their own realities? It's again a very high level, larger point of view question. Please take it whichever way you want to, Jess. But I'm again hoping that you got the gist of the question.
So how am I thinking about polarization? Repeat it one more time.
The question is around this large polarization which has been happening, and different groups of people choosing to believe in their own realities. So everything is political, everything is polarized right now. So finding a common ground is quite difficult. Even a vaccine seems to have political connotations. What happened? Any incident seems to have political connotations. So when you have disparate group of people who each choose to believe their own version of reality, how do you find a way to work with them, especially around social causes, the way you plan to now?
Yeah.
How do you get people to have a dialogue?
That's a good question, because I think like this idea that we're more polarized than ever, it's possible, but I think we also have more channels to kind of feed our own ideas and have tunnel vision and not be open to other people's perspectives. I think the obligation of someone who is working in the role of diversity and inclusion is to understand where people's ideas come from, right? Because that's kind of the basis for you being able to impact some sort of change or really understand where they're coming from. So I think my politics haven't changed. Wherever I live in the world, like I kind of have a fundamental idea that, you know, everyone deserves the right to X, Y, or Z, whatever. This is not the forum to discuss my political ideas, but professionally, I think that it's my responsibility to hear out what it is that my colleagues are saying. And DC is one of the most political cities in the country. It's the nation's capital. And so we have the left versus the right. But I think there are some issues that we can be aligned with. And I think if I'm looking specifically at my organization, there's alignment that there's an issue, right? So that's why I'm here. And my responsibility is kind of to pull together what are the issues that we have and make sure that all perspectives are being heard. Because one of the things that bothers me a lot about this polarization is that, you know, once you think you're right, you don't want to listen to what the other person has to say. And I think that there are some things that are non-negotiable, but a lot of times we're saying the same thing in a different way. We just only want to hear our own voice. And so a lot of the work around diversity to me and my particular role and what I see diversity and inclusion offering an organization is about having a broader perspective that is more comprehensive in understanding what the issues are, what the problems are, and then being able to kind of use that as a platform to create solutions. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think I might have.
You have, you know, but I also understand the question itself is very complex in its nature. Once you start looking at the question itself, possibly there are a lot of things to touch. You know, all the best with your role out there, because we talk and we do our likes and our share on our forwards, right? And that's the best most of us do. No one actually works on issues which really, you know, the society really needs. And you are one of the few people in the world who said, you know what, I am going to work around this. So you do have, I mean, you know, our respect, our admiration, and our best wishes. Just, I do want to ask one more question, and this is around, you know, your own personal lives and again, behavioral science. So do you use behavioral science or related strategies in your own personal life? Is there something of a technique, tip, something that you use that you want to share with us?
Probably the two most useful behavioral science tools I've really put into practice are around habits and building better habits and goal setting and goal making. This is kind of one of the tools that I offer my first year students in our course about SMART goals, for example, or making a plan, making a checklist, kind of having that behavioral science tool at my disposal, as well as commitment devices. So, you know, accountability factors that I think both of those could also be useful at a personal level, but also at a professional level. And as organizations think about using behavioral science, those are probably my two go-to favorite tools that behavioral science has given me.
All right, Jess, you know, there are a lot more questions that we want to ask.
I see like 75 messages and I haven't read a single one of them. I don't know. If someone wanted to stay on and was dying and had a burning question, I haven't seen what anyone said. So I'm happy to stay on in a few extra minutes if that's okay. I know it's late for some of you, but I'm happy to stay on and answer your questions. Also, some of you guys have already added me on LinkedIn. If there's some topic that you wanted to discuss further, I think for me, and I don't want to get off the call without saying this, like the behavioral science community that I have been able to be a part of, Prakash, Louise, many people that I've met randomly on LinkedIn have really helped me to become a better academic director, to become a better person. And so I 100% am committed to paying it forward. If there's something I could help you with, if you need a book recommendation, if you have a question, I see this community as a family, and I know that we're here to support each other. We're kind of navigating uncharted waters at time. I mean, I'm starting a new job tomorrow, and I'm sure that in a week's time, I'll be like, Prakash, I need help with this thing, and he will help me. So if you have questions or things that you wanted to debate further, or something that we didn't discuss today, just send me a message on LinkedIn. And, you know, I'm starting a new job, but time permitting, I'm happy to chat with you. I'm also happy to stay on a little bit longer if that's okay. And answer questions that you guys might have, or talk about things that you want to discuss.
Okay, well, that's fabulous. What I'll do then, Jessica, is I will wrap up the event, and I'll let all of you know. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today to hear Jessica, to chat with us, put your fantastic questions. To let you all know that next week we are going to be joined by Matt Tollette. He's the author of Start at the End. He's also the head of behavioral science at Frog, which is design and strategy consultancy. And if you go and look on Matt's profile on LinkedIn, I'll tell you now, he puts a note up which says basically, reach out to me if you want to reach out to me, but don't expect me to connect with you. You just follow me. And this was quite a lesson to me at the start of lockdown. He was actually one of the first people I attempted to connect with at the start of lockdown as I got to learn about behavioral science. He taught me a very good lesson. And within the next 30 days, I met 50 of my connections and met all my new connections in those subsequent days. It laid down the groundwork for this subsequent year. So always have the confidence to reach out to, as Jessica's offered so kindly, reach out to anybody who you are a connection of, whom you would like to talk to, and just randomly say, hey, I'd love to meet you for a Zoom call, because it makes such a difference. As you all know from joining here and chatting with people, it makes such a difference to speak one-on-one. So we'll wrap up today's event. I'm actually going to leave. But if any of you want to stay on the call and speak a little bit further, Jessica, you are more than welcome. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And we'll see you at the same time next week. Bye, Jessica. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.